Bem-vindos, bem-vindos a mais um Hospitality Talks. Olha só, para você que gosta de churrasco, gosta de uma boa carne, é chefe de cozinha, dono de restaurante, hoje o meu convidado aqui é mais do que especial. Ela é a gerente de desenvolvimento da Carne Australiana aqui na Inglaterra. A Carne Australiana, ela já foi por 3 anos consecutivos eleita a melhor carne do mundo. Você quer saber o porquê? Fica até o final desse episódio. So, welcome, Emma. Thanks for coming to Hospitality Talks.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you at. And why house beef and lamb? Want to start with that?
It's a big question. Well, I guess I'm probably biased, being Australian, but I think for us, we're just so incredibly proud of the beef and lamb that we produce in Australia, I guess, and we think it's getting so much traction. There's so much global demand for it because of, there's a few kind of core values or core tenets that go into producing our meat, and it's the quality of it and just the consistency of it. When I do like a chef's lunch that you've been at a couple, Eduardo,
Yes,
I'll usually always start the talk with, has anyone here eaten Australian beef? A few hands go up, and I'll say, did you like it? Unanimously, usually the room will say yes, and I'll say, why? What did you like about it? And 90% of the room, what they will say is, I know what I'm going to get when I buy it. The quality is always good, and I know that the brand that I'm buying, I'm going to get that same eating quality and that same experience each and every time. And we're so proud of that we've got, that quality and that name for consistency right around the world. And then also that we're just so proud of how we produce it. We have world-leading animal welfare standards, some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world. And the way that we manage it around the country is really unique because we have such a unique landscape and climate. So how we manage our animals and how we manage our land to get the best outcomes for both is really unique and really varied around the country. And so we're really considered about how we do that. And also that, around the world, there's a lot of conversation around the sustainability of red meat, right?
Yep,
I think everybody's thinking about how they improve the sustainability of their business, or do we need to cut out red meat? What is the next step for us to be more sustainable? And I think, the Australian industry in particular has been so proactive,
I think so,
in understanding our footprint and how we can do our best to both look after the animals, leave the land in a better place than when we found it, and also reduce our carbon footprint. So I think I've prattled on at you a while now about why we love it, but when you think about why you choose Aussie beef and lamb, I think it really comes down to we are leading the way in terms of sustainable beef and lamb production. We take animal welfare very seriously, and we do it in a really considered way so that no matter where you are in the country, there are guidelines and guardrails in place to make sure you're doing it to the best of, to suit your animals and to suit your climate. The consistency of the product. And one thing that I forgot, which I will which is remiss of me to miss, is we also have really comprehensive traceability systems in Australia. So our animals, we can trace them from birth to processing, every property that they've been on. There's a really rigorous program that sits behind that. So every property that animal's been on, we can trace throughout its life. So the steak that you're getting on your plate, we can trace that back to each property it's been on. And that way we're able to really guarantee the safety and the biosecurity of that beef. And I think one thing we're always gloating about as well is that in Australia, we've never had a reportable disease or pest outbreak. So in the same way that other countries, struggle with diseases among their herd or their flock, we don't. And
why do you think?
Yeah, I guess it comes down to us being an island is helpful. because we are so far away from everyone and everything. So it's easy for us to kind of manage what comes in. But also because of the traceability systems that I mentioned. So if there ever is a problem, we can trace it right back to the source, cordon off the problem, and treat it in a really targeted way. And I think that really speaks to why, we're seeing such growing demand around the world, is because, if there is ever a problem, which, touch wood, there's not been to date, we can deal with it in a really efficient, targeted way. Sorry, that was a long.
No, that was very good.
There's so many things that we love about Aussie beef and lamb.
That's
So
very, very good, actually. I know that your background comes from the farm, and you said about the climate. That's the climate in Australia makes all the difference. Why is that? Why?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess for context, so my family have a cattle farm in Queensland.
Okay.
And at the moment their, temperatures are sitting at around 35, 40 degrees. They're hitting 80, 90% humidity. It's very hot where my family live. And so you can imagine that the way you need to look after animals, or the way you need to look after your land in a hot, humid climate varies very differently to how you would look after them in a colder climate, or how you get the best out of your land in a cooler climate that maybe you see more consistent rain throughout the year. So when we talk about, the variability of Australia's climate, it's a big place. And, when you think about our tropical north, the animals that we breed up there, and the animals that are suited to that climate are different breeds to what you would see down in the south.
And what are them? Sorry.
Yeah, so you would see, call them tropical breed cattle, like Brahmins, and then you would see, and they're the ones that you would see like with the big humps that you might see grazing on big properties. And then in the south we'd have more British breeds, so you'd see like more Angus or Hereford breeds down in the south where it's colder, and they're bred obviously for a cooler climate. I think the main thing I try to talk about, when we think about the difference between the UK and Australia is, here you would shed your animals in the winter, right? So you need to keep them inside, you need to keep them warm to get the best out of them. In Australia, across the board, we just have a more temperate climate. So even in our cooler south, it doesn't get so cold that they need to be inside. And we have animals that are bred for the cool. So we don't ever need to put our animals inside to keep them warm throughout the winter. And I think it's sometimes conceptualizing that difference between what production looks like in the UK versus what it looks like in Australia.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In where the Wagyu beef stays between North and South.
Yeah, Wagyu, I think, is an interesting one because I guess you can, you're probably seeing Wagyu production across. You probably wouldn't see it super far north. You're probably seeing it in the middle of the country, down. But that doesn't mean it's not happening in the north, and really comes down to the genetics you're choosing for your herd, and if you're choosing genetics that are bred for the north or bred for the south. But we are seeing growing Wagyu production in Australia, and it's really exciting to see just that global, I guess, acceptance and recognition of Australian Wagyu
100%.
is really taking off. I mean, you were saying before you're seeing more Australian Wagyu. What are you hearing about it here?
Well, I think Australian Wagyu is great. Like I had in one of my restaurants for over 4 or 5 years, and I have to agree with you, the consistency is there, and I think it's a great product. We had a picanha Wagyu on our menu, and the consistency is just great, and I remember back then the picanha prices were a bit different from what is today, so I assume that's picanha, it's becoming more popular. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it across the board, just those cuts that in the past, I think the UK has always been a very like roasting kind of culture, right? So very focused on cuts that you can whack in the oven or you can slow cook and then have with your Sunday roast. And then just some of those more alternative cuts, or maybe thinking about how you could break the rump down differently. So, for example, taking the picanha off and cooking it in maybe more of a Brazilian style, I think is starting to gain some traction here. So it's becoming more popular. So I think when you're talking about the price of the picanha, I think that's probably reflecting that there's different cooking styles kind of coming through the UK at the moment, as well as that growing popularity of Aussie Wagyu. So yeah, which is really exciting. It's cool to see cuts being utilized in different ways. And that, I guess, because of that quality of Australian product, when you're thinking about secondary cuts, you know, so it's maybe not known as being as tender as the fillet or the ribeye, but because of the quality of the Aussie product, you're still getting in your secondary cuts that quality, that tenderness, that flavor is still coming through in maybe cuts that aren't necessarily known for that.
It is very interesting. Do you know, like in Brazil, the picanha, it's even more expensive than the fillet.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
like
I mean, I think I'd go for picanha over a fillet too.
yeah,
I don't know.
probably I would go as well, but you know,
Yeah, that's
UK, it's a bit different. Probably it's almost double.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And yeah, and you see a difference there. No?
Yeah.
What about the lamb?
Lamb. Well, just before we move on from Wagyu, I think I did also want to say, when we're talking about the popularity of Aussie Wagyu, you know, when you think of Wagyu, sometimes the first thing you think about is Japan.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And so while Japan produces the most Wagyu in the world, Australia is actually the second largest producer of Wagyu in the world, which might be surprising to some people.
Is the second
largest producer of Wagyu in the world, which for some people might be quite interesting, because it might not be necessarily be the first thing that you think about when you think about Aussie beef, but also that we're the largest exporter of Wagyu in the world. So so Japan produces the most, but they're also consuming a lot of it.
Okay.
Whereas, you know, we're producing second most amount, but again, because of our market access around the world, which is underpinned by all those things that we kind of talked about before, about the biosecurity, the quality, our sustainability, we just have access to so many markets, and there are just growing demand all around the world, not just here in the UK, for Aussie beef, which I think is developing its own reputation for its own kind of unique kind of flavor and what it brings, which is not necessarily the, you know, the super, super highly marbled Japanese Wagyu, but offers something a bit different from Australia and still gives you that unique Wagyu flavor and experience. So yeah, so it's exciting to see that kind of taking off.
But I think this side of the world, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this side of the world, we kind of, our taste would be better for the Wagyu, the Australian Wagyu, than the Japanese. I think it's too rich. I don't know. That's can be too rich, and I think the Australian is just like the perfect, you know.
It's probably, the Australia probably brings maybe more earthy quality to it, and probably more suited. I mean, depending on what you got, like there's a real range of what Australia can offer in terms of Wagyu marbling richness. But I think if you're thinking about Wagyu steaks or how you're going to present it or cook it in a restaurant, I think that's where Australian Wagyu really comes into its own, in that it's probably is more maybe suited to steak dining in some cases than maybe some Japanese Wagyu.
Yeah, I think for who likes a big steaks.
Yeah,
you know, like,
As a Brazilian.
As a Brazilian, we like the big steaks.
But yes, sorry, you did ask me about lamb.
Yeah.
And what about lamb do you want to know?
Why the Aussie lamb? Why it's so popular? I think it's growing and
yeah. So I think across the board, awareness and acceptance and demand for Aussie beef and lamb is growing, you know, around the world, but particularly here in the UK and in Europe. And so for lamb, I guess similarly, I guess it's the same things that we're really proud of, that it's those same approach to animal welfare, the same approach to sustainability, that same approach to biosecurity and traceability across both species. We're seeing more and more lamb come in, and interestingly seeing more Australian exporters looking into, growing their lamb offerings. So offering, that grass-fed lamb that we really that we know and love so well. And then also looking at, some higher marbling lamb offerings that, offer that richness, I guess.
Richness,
Yeah, which is really exciting to see that coming into the market more. I think Australian lamb also, similarly to what we were talking about with the Wagyu, that Australian Wagyu offers its own kind of distinct flavour or brings something complementary to the table. Australian lamb does as well. When you're thinking about Australian lamb, maybe compared to local lamb or Welsh lamb, offers maybe a more subtle kind of flavour, and maybe not as, I don't know, lack of a better word, that lamby kind of, that, that really intense kind of flavour sometimes. Australian lamb, I think, offers, something maybe a bit more subtle. And I think an important point to make across both beef and lamb is that when you're thinking about buying Aussie beef or lamb, it's not about replacing British meat. In the UK, the UK has always imported, 25-30% of the meat that it's consumed to meet demand.
25 to 30%.
Yeah, across beef and lamb on average. It is simply that there is just such demand for quality beef and lamb. It's not, able to produce all of it here locally. So there's always been a place for, that experience that other countries bring in when you think about US beef or Irish beef or Argentinian beef, or, what that brings to the table. And I think when you're thinking about Australian beef, it's about what does Australian beef bring alongside those other countries, and what kind of different experience does it offer, rather than replacing the great quality beef that is already here. It's about, I guess, like enhancing that menu. And so I guess with that in mind, when we think about Aussie lamb, when you think about our climate, how I was saying before, we have contrasting seasons in Australia. So when it's cold here, it's really warm back home. And so when your lamb season is reaching its low point, ours is reaching a peak. So when lamb is short here, we're able to fill that supply gap. And because of that temperate climate that we have, we're able to produce lamb consistently all year round. Peaks in spring, which for us is around September, October, November. But then is a steady production all throughout the year. So we're able to consistently supply that same quality lamb all throughout the year and plug those supply gaps throughout your year here. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Out of this 25% of meats, what's the piece of Australian beef on this? Would say Australian beef is the most popular?
No, I would say the popularity of Australian beef is growing. So we've kind of always had some product in the market, but it's only in the last 2 years since our government's reached a free trade agreement that we've been able to bring some more product in, that we've got the ability to bring more Aussie product to the UK. So it's really in the last 2 years that we've been able to kind of get more product in, put it in front of people and let it speak for itself. So I couldn't tell you, which it does. Thank you, Eduardo. So I don't think I could tell you the exact proportion of that imported piece that Australia makes up. I think some of the most, I think the countries that make up the biggest piece of that pie would be Ireland, Poland.
Okay.
I think in the past, US would have been a big piece of that, which is dropped off a little bit at the moment just due to drought conditions in the US and South America. But yeah, we're really excited that we're seeing it grow at a really stable way. We're just seeing consistent, healthy growth. Nothing's going crazy and off the charts. It's just, as people kind of get confidence in the product and develop those relationships with Australians, we're just seeing a really steady growth, which we're excited about.
I like what you're saying. It's all about the experience, isn't it? There are good meats around the world and all that, but that's all about the experience. And I truly believe that the Aussie beef it's a great experience. I never had a bad experience with it. No with beef, no with lamb.
And not with the people either, right?
No, not with the people either. I would say no. Very good consistency. I think. I think it's a great product. You say that Australian beef, it's kind of all around the world. What's the biggest market today for Aussie beef?
Would be North America.
North America.
Yeah, and throughout Asia would be really big markets for us, just because of long-standing trade partnerships with those countries, and the proximity of Asia to Australia as well. Yeah.
What about South America?
Yeah, I actually couldn't tell you how much is going into. Yeah, there is a bit going into South America. I think the biggest market for America though would be North America. Yeah.
North America.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how do you see the market on the next 10 years for UK? You are the business developer here.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, if I'm good at my job, we'll see it. We'll see it. We'll see a really steady growth, I guess, is what we're looking for. So I think on the whole, as we were talking about before, we're seeing different cuisines, alternative cuts that maybe in the past weren't utilized as much, different ways of cooking or presenting the food. And I think Aussie beef and lamb lends itself so well to so many different applications. And as you said, restaurants are looking for meat they can rely on, and consumers are looking for quality, and they're looking for meat that aligns with their values, right? So they want to know that when they're buying a steak, that the land was not destroyed in the process, that the animals lived the best life that they could, and that that supply chain is thinking about or taking steps towards reducing its carbon footprint. And so I think when you think about all those things on the whole, Australian beef and lamb kind of just fits the bill, because we're doing those things. We're thinking about what consumers are wanting, and we're consciously thinking about the way we produce our beef and lamb. And so I think when we think about what the market's going to look like over the next 10 years, I think local product is going to remain and is going to keep having pride of place, as it should, because you should be proud of what your country's producing. And then I think Australian beef and lamb will continue to just develop a really strong reputation for providing a consistent, reliable, complementary, place at the table, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree, but like we are seeing lots of, we are seeing the vegan trend kind of growing now in UK. How do you see for restaurants? How are you seeing on the last 2-3 years?
I think it's really interesting, because often I think what drives someone to become vegan or vegetarian is ethical reasons, right? Like they're thinking about, again, like all of us, trying to be conscious about what they're consuming and trying to do it in a way that they believe is benefiting the planet and looking after the animals and not harming the animals in any way. So I think over the last even 2 or 3 years, I would say that trend well, from the data that I've seen, has actually not grown all that much. I think we've seen a bit of a plateau of people sustainably, like, you know, over the long term, turning to veganism or vegetarianism. I think you're seeing more people kind of in that flexitarian, you know, where maybe they eat, you know, more days of the week they eat predominantly plants, and then, you know, but then they're still looking for, when they go out, they will still eat meat, and they want quality because maybe they're not consuming it every day, but it's a special experience for them, and they want to rely on the meat that they're consuming. They want to know that it's going to be good because they're happy to spend more money on it because it's a special occasion, it's a special experience. So I think, one, I don't think that trend is growing. I think you've probably reached a plateau. And as people begin to realize that beef production and lamb production is not at odds with improving environmental outcomes, it can actually help and is part of the solution. So can be part of like regenerative agriculture practices. The Australian beef and lamb industry is committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. We've reduced our carbon footprint between 2005 and 2021. We saw a nearly 80% reduction in our carbon emissions.
80%.
Yeah, and you know, and we've also reduced the amount of water it takes to produce a kilo of beef by about 73%. So, you know, so the industry is really working hard to produce beef and lamb in a way and to adopt practices that improve the land and reduce our overall environmental impact. And so I think as agriculture continues to produce or to kind of move in that direction, consumers are becoming more aware of that, and you know, they are coming back to meat because it is aligning with their values. We did a workshop recently, and we had some food service trends presented to us. And what actually we saw since COVID was that there was a rise in the number of meals at restaurants that were predominantly meat. So that's actually probably the most popular trend that's coming through restaurants and in food service at the moment, is that, as we said before, people are looking for that quality meat. And so when they're out with their friends and they're buying plates to share and food to share amongst themselves, they are buying more and more meals that are predominantly meat, but they're looking for quality.
And I think Australian on both on sustainability and quality, you are kind of a step ahead of the game, isn't it? It's
well, we're working hard to be. So
do you see, like, in Australia, the consumers, the young generation, they are is that something that's really matter for them, the sustainability as well? You see the same as UK?
Absolutely. I think that's a trend we're seeing around the world. You know, we did a consumer study across 3 years, and each year consistently consumers said, 91%, I think, said that the sustainability credentials of their meat was important to them. So when they're shopping, when they're at the supermarket and they're thinking about what they're going to feed their family, they do have in their mind, is this produced in a way that I would be proud of? And so when our consumers at home are telling us that, when our consumers around the world are telling us that, and because, you know, our farmers, Australian agriculture accounts for more than half of Australia's land mass. So our farmers are our biggest environmentalists, and it just makes sense. It's not in their interest to destroy the land. It's not in their interest not to look after their animals. So when you think about, it's what our consumers want, it's what our farmers care about. It is important to everyone that we get this right and that we keep, you know, looking to how we can improve.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think the world has a lot to learn with the Australian way of doing it. It is great. What's the most popular cut in UK now? That's
Yeah, I don't
For the,
I don't know that I could speak to what the most popular cut in the UK is. In terms of what the most popular cuts that we're exporting here, I think we're seeing, top sides. You're seeing just, I guess, the usual suspects. You're seeing ribeyes, fillets, strip loins. I think those things are still probably the most popular. For lamb, again, I think it's, I think you're seeing, a lot of legs, still those kind of roasting cuts. But I think the way people are utilizing it is changing, which is
that
interesting.
brisket one of...
Brisket's popular. I don't think it's in our top 5, but it is very popular. Absolutely. I think that low and slow kind of American style barbecue is exploding everywhere, right? All around the world. It's really popular. So I think, and brisket is kind of that flagship
for
that low and slow style. Yeah. So I think absolutely people are getting more awareness of it, learning how to get the most out of it, how to cook it, and just have fun with it, I guess. Yeah.
Chefs are more tends to go for that direction here on UK markets. You see.
I think chefs are wanting to try their hand at it, right? Because what about you? Do you do anything with brisket?
I love slow cooking, yes. I mean, back home in Brazil, we love ribs, and I think briskets, it's something that we are kind of... starting to embrace,
in Brazil,
more and more. But I think it's a great cut of meat. I think.
And in Brazil, are you seeing it more as that, like, are you cooking it over coals or on the barbecue? Or is it more that like wet style? How are you guys using
coals.
it? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. We kind of like the open fire, and you know. What about in Australia? The barbecue culture, how...
Yeah, we love a barbecue. I think it's interesting because when I think of Australian barbecue, I think of someone's backyard with just a not necessarily like the Weber style, but more just that, what do you call, like the Blackstone kind of barbecue where you're grilling meats. But like everywhere around the world, that American style barbecue is just exploding in popularity. It brings so much flavor, I guess. You get to experiment so much. And yeah, I think you are really seeing it growing. I mean, even my brother is really into it now. He's got himself kitted out with a meat thermometer. He's got his, spice collection. He's got himself a Weber barbecue, considers himself quite the chef. So I think, you're seeing more and more just everyday consumers, our mums and dads, our brothers, our friends wanting to try their hand at it as well, just because they're having fun, and it's a good way of, it's a good shared experience, right? Because you're cooking a whole brisket, so you're inviting people around.
Invite your friends, family.
It's so social and can be so personalized to you how you do it. So yeah, so that was a long way of saying I think it's growing everywhere, and I think Australia is no different.
That's very good. Look, Emma, thank you very much for coming. It was really good to learn more about the house beef, lamb, and again, I think the whole world has a lot to learn with the quality and sustainability of Australian beef. And please, if you'd like to leave how the viewers can find more about the house beef and lamb.
Absolutely. Well, thank you firstly for having us on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, Eduardo. And yeah, to find us, find us on social media like everybody else, Aussie Beef and Lamb UK on Instagram and Facebook. And if you head to aussiebeefandlambuk.co.uk, you can find our website. So if you're interested in more information, we have days worth of reading there for you, but also we have a handy page called our Where to Buy page. So if you are someone at home wanting to eat Aussie beef and or lamb at a restaurant, we've got a list of restaurants there you can go to. Or if you are a chef and you're wanting to know where you can source it for your restaurant, we have a list of distributors and exporters as well that we can help you get in touch with if you're wanting to reach out to anyone.
That's very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.